Hello, and welcome to part 4 of our lecture on the circulatory system. And in this lecture, we're going to take a look at the lymphatic circulatory system, as well as some disease processes associated with the cardiovascular system. Now, with the lymphatic circulatory system, what we're going to be looking at is going to be transport of the lymph, essentially transport of the excess tissue fluid. And so, again, keep in mind that what we've talked about up until this point is the cardiovascular system. So we're moving materials throughout the bloodstream, whether we're talking about plasma, the fluid within the blood, or cells within the bloodstream, where within the cardiovascular system vessels, we start out with the heart, with a pump, and we're essentially pumping the fluid very rapidly through the arteries, through the capillaries at its exchange mechanism, and then back through the veins to return to the heart. So we've got a closed circulatory system, we've got a pump. But when we take a look at the lymphatic circulatory system, we have something that's very different. And so what we're looking at is going to be the tissue fluid, the fluids that are found in between the cells throughout the body, kind of outside of the cells, in the tissues, kind of within the organs. And in general, what we're going to see is the cardiovascular system is going to deliver lots of materials, including fluid, out to the periphery, and some of that fluid is going to be left in the tissues, left in the peripheral regions of the body. And so that's going to start to build up. And so we've got to have a mechanism in place that we can return that excess tissue fluid back towards the heart, where it can be returned to the cardiovascular system, essentially cycled in and then recycled through the body. And so when we take a look at the lymphatic vessels, we're looking at collecting that excess tissue fluid and the materials within it, maybe cellularly, maybe lymphocytes, other cells, and returning it back towards the heart, where it can actually be combined with the plasma within the cardiovascular system. And so what we need then is, in essence, a way that we can collect the fluids. And so we're going to have a vessel, a closed-in vessel, out in the periphery that's going to collect it. So we essentially allow the excess tissue fluid to come into the lymphatic circulatory system. And it's going to be moving in one direction. So we're essentially going to be moving those fluids from the periphery back towards the heart. And again, that's different from the cardiovascular system, where we're essentially pumping the fluids out through the capillary bed and then back again. So lymphatic vessels, lymphatic circulatory system is moving things in one direction, and along the way, as it's being moved in one direction, it's going to be filtered through a series of structures called lymph nodes that we're going to see in one of the upcoming lectures when we talk about the immune system. So we're going to be filtering the tissue fluid, looking for debris, looking for potential pathogenic substances, disease-causing substances, foreign materials, things like that. So we've got a system that starts out in the periphery, returns towards the heart, and it's a system that lacks a pump. We don't have a heart for the lymphatic vessels. And so what that means then is that we got to maintain the flow of the lymph in one direction. And so we're going to see lots of valves, like we saw with valves within the veins. Okay, so if you start looking at this, kind of out in the periphery are going to be the lymphatic capillaries. And so they're going to be collecting the lymph from the intercellular spaces. They're essentially collecting the lymph from the spaces within the tissue, so that excess tissue fluid. And now these are going to be blind-ended endothelial tubes. So they're going to be the same thing, in essence, as capillaries. So they're going to be lined by a simple squamous epithelium, but in comparison to the cardiovascular system capillaries, what we're going to see is that the lymphatic capillaries are going to be much larger in diameter. A cardiovascular system capillary, we said, was going to be about the size of a red blood cell, about 5 to 10 micrometers in diameter. What we're going to see with the lymphatic capillaries is that they could have a diameter up to about 100 micrometers. So 10 times, in essence, what we'd see with a cardiovascular system capillary. We're going to see the simple squamous epithelial cells are going to lack fenestrations, but they're going to have fewer tight junctions. And so it's going to be possible for things to squeeze between these cells under some circumstances. And if we take a look at this, what we're going to see is that cardiovascular system capillaries are going to have lots of red blood cells within them. Lymphatic capillaries, under most circumstances, and I basically say all circumstances, aren't going to have red blood cells, but they may have some white blood cells. They may have some nucleated cells. So in essence, if you see a red blood cell, you should start thinking about a cardiovascular system capillary. If you see nucleated cells and lots of nucleated cells, you should start thinking about the lymphatic circulatory system. So if we take a look at these lymphatic capillaries, what we're going to see are going to be structures that essentially are going to be moving fluid without a whole lot of cells associated with them. And so the cardiovascular system capillaries, we need to have simple squamous cells that are very flat so they don't interfere with the movement of the cells within the bloodstream. They don't interfere with the red blood cells. It's actually bumping into the endothelial lining. We don't have that problem within the lymphatic capillaries. And so what we can see is that with the lymphatic capillaries, their simple squamous epithelial cells will often have nuclei that are going to bulge into the lumen. So we're not going to have the nice, smooth, flat surface. We're still going to have a smooth surface, but it's going to bulge or bump where we have the nuclei being present. So if we take a look at that, lymphatic capillaries are going to drain into larger and larger vessels, essentially into lymphatic vessels and into lymphatic ducts, as we're returning the fluids into the region where it will be returned to the heart and then added back into the plasma, so recycling these fluids. If we take a look at these larger vessels, either the lymphatic vessels or lymphatic ducts, we're going to see that their walls in general are going to resemble veins. And so they're going to be essentially not a whole lot of smooth muscle present there. Within the smooth muscle, you're going to find some longitudinal fibers as well as circular smooth muscle fibers. Again, circular are the smooth muscle cells that wrap around the lumen. Longitudinal are going to be the smooth muscle cells that run down along the length of this vessel. If we take a look at the lymphatic vessels, we're going to see that the longitudinal fibers are going to be the ones that are predominant. We don't have to regulate the diameter of the lumen. What we need to do is maintain some structure to the vessel length so that it doesn't collapse down, so that we're able to maintain essentially a constricted length along the lumen, so it doesn't dilate like we saw with the varicose veins. So longitudinal, a smooth muscle. Take a look at the walls disorganized. It's not as well layered as what we would see in a cardiovascular system vessel. And you're also going to see lots and lots of valves. There are going to be much more valves within a lymphatic vessel than we're going to see within veins. And so if you see a valve, you should automatically think either vein or lymphatic vessel. Take a look at it. If it has a good wall structure and valves, you're probably talking about a vein. If it doesn't have a real organized wall structure and some valves, you're probably dealing with a lymphatic vessel. And again, you're more likely to find red blood cells within a vein, where you're going to find nucleated cells, nucleated white blood cells, when you're taking a look at these lymphatic vessels. So again, in this table is in the handout. Take a look at it. Identification criteria for looking at the arteries versus veins versus lymphatics. Good clear layers within the arteries and veins, but the media is more prominent in the arteries. The vein, the adventitia, is going to be more prominent. Lymphatic vessels, the layers are going to be more disorganized, and in general, a little bit more tunica adventitia than we'd have within the media. Often have a scalloped appearance with the lymphatic vessels because they're going to be collapsed down, not a whole lot of wall structure that's going to be present there. If we take a look at what types of cells are going to be present within these vessels, red blood cells probably going to be found within the arteries, but not consistently. Often found within the veins, but no red blood cells within the lymphatic vessels. Red blood cells should stay within the closed circulatory system. Within both the artery and the vein as cardiovascular system vessels, you're going to see very rare, very occasional lymphocytes. And these are going to be nucleated white blood cells within the cardiovascular system, within the arteries, within the veins. These are incredibly rare cells, so it's going to be really random, really rare to see them in a specimen. It's going to be more common to see those within a lymphatic vessel. So if you've got no red blood cells and some nucleated cells within a vessel, it's almost guaranteed that what you're going to be looking at is going to be a lymphatic vessel. So that's going to finish up our discussion of the lymphatic circulatory system. The next thing is that we're going to take a look at some diseases associated with the cardiovascular system. And what we're going to see is that because this transport mechanism in the body is so important, it's estimated that about half of the deaths, about 50% of the deaths in the United States, are associated with some type of deficit or defect associated with the cardiovascular system. And this could be anything from a heart attack to a stroke. And so if we take a look at this, basically what we're dealing with cardiovascular diseases is something that disrupts blood flow. And so this could be something like a thrombus or an embolus, which will go through and block off a blood vessel. And if you block off that blood vessel, you prevent the flow of fluids, you prevent the flow of oxygen and nutrients and all of these other things beyond that point where it's blocked off. So you can, in essence, starve those cells that are beyond that point that would be supplied by that vessel. You can have something like atherosclerosis. And with atherosclerosis, what we're looking at is a plaque buildup. And so the plaque buildup is going to do two different things. It's going to start to build up along the lumen of the blood vessel. It's going to form a much rougher appearance to the blood vessel. It's going to disrupt the blood flow. It's going to, because of the formation of these plaques, it's going to decrease the lumen diameter, which is going to make it harder for the blood to flow through that region. And it can also contribute to hardening of the arteries. And now what happens with the hardening of the arteries is essentially, keep in mind what happens in a normal artery. When the heart contracts, we're going to have the arteries expand out to take that increased pressure, that increased blood flow. And then when the heart is relaxing, they're going to recoil. And as they recoil, they're going to continue to push the blood through our system. With atherosclerosis, what we're going to have is a hardening of the arteries so that we're going to lose that pliability. We're going to lose that flexibility. So because of that, the arteries are going to be less likely to be able to expand and recoil. And so they're going to be more rigid, more like hard pipes as opposed to flexible tubes within the body. And again, that's going to contribute to difficulty regulating the blood flow. And it's also going to increase kind of the back pressure within the system. And so it's going to cause hypertension. It's going to cause high blood pressure because we lose the ability to really regulate the blood pressure by either constricting or relaxing our smooth muscle cells within our tunica media. So if we take a look at this, and this is a muscular artery in both cases. On the left-hand side, we've got a healthy, relatively healthy muscular artery. On the right-hand side, we've got a cholesterol embolus. And so we're essentially looking at what happens when you start to accumulate atherosclerosis, you start to accumulate these deposits. It can go through, it's going to dilate the lumen, to make the lumen a lot less in diameter. So it's going to impede the blood flow through this area. It's going to make the wall less pliable, so it's not going to be able to expand and recoil. It's not going to be able to regulate the blood flow beyond this point. And in very severe circumstances, it can actually block off the blood vessel. And so what we've got here with a relatively large muscular artery, recognizing what this muscular artery is doing, it's delivering blood to a region within the organ. And so what happens if we block this off? It's like turning off a little valve. We're not getting the flow down into the region distal to this. We're not getting blood flow into the cells that are supplied by this artery. And so what we're looking at is a very dramatic disruption to the functioning of this vessel. And these cholesterol deposits can build up. You've probably heard about LDL and HDL. LDL, low-density lipids, carry the cholesterol within the blood. HDL is an alternative form to this. It's also going to be carrying lipids, carrying the cholesterol, but it decreases the risk of the deposits. And so they look at the LDL-HDL ratio to get an idea of what your risks are for something like atherosclerosis. We can take a look at an aneurysm. An aneurysm is a local weakening of the blood vessel wall. And so that what you've got then is, because you've got a weakening in the wall, you've got disruption of, say, the smooth muscle cells, it's going to be more likely that this blood vessel is going to expand as the heart contracts, but you don't have the ability for the recoil to occur. And so because of that, you can have very dramatic disruption of the blood flow because it essentially outpockets, it's not be able to recoil down, and it's going to interfere, and under some circumstances, it's at risk for rupturing, breaking, and essentially opening up what would be our normally closed circulatory system. That finishes up our lecture series on the circulatory system, both the cardiovascular and the lymphatic circulatory system. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at hoffmanj@arcadia.edu. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.